STEM City USA Healthy Doses series is your passport to a balanced lifestyle. Hosted by Dr. Tiffany Anderson and presented in the Boston Scientific Auditorium. And now, Dr. Tiffany Anderson.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Healthy Doses, broadcasting live in the STEM City Metaverse, brought to you by Boston Scientific. My name is Rayondon Kennedy, and I am your moderator for today. And I just want to thank you for being here. We created Healthy Doses to give you the resources, tips, and everything you need to be the best you possible. Now, how do we do that? I think the best way for you to be the best you possible is to have great mental health, which is why we brought in our host, Dr. Tiffany Anderson, to help guide us along that path. Dr. Anderson, how are you doing today?
I am well, Ray. How are you?
I'm good. Dr. Anderson, what's our topic today? What are we about to jump into?
Okay. Well, first, I want us to go over that QR code so folks know how to begin kind of communicating with us and all that good stuff.
Yes. So let me just give you a reminder. So right above Dr. Anderson's head, if you point that away, over in the corner, you'll see a QR code. If you have any comments today, if you want to give some thoughts, some questions, or interact with us in any way, shape, or form, you go ahead and you use that QR code and shoot us a message, shoot us a question, and we'll see it and we'll be able to address it either throughout the show or at the end when we have a Q&A section. So if you have that, go ahead and scan that and really just tell us hi. Just let us know that you're there, and we'll love to hear from you. So, Dr. Anderson, now we got that covered. What are we talking about today?
So today we are highlighting self-sabotage, right? What that looks like, how it's showing up in our lives, and how we can stop it or begin to maintain it, right? So first, I want us to just kind of get an idea of what that may look like. So when we think of self-sabotage, a lot of things come up, maybe or maybe not, depending on the person, right? So I'm going to start by just asking our audience, Rhea included, right, just some questions. You don't need to answer them. I just want you to think about them, right? If they resonate with you in any way, that may inform you that you may either dealt with self-sabotage in the past or you may be currently dealing with it, okay? So I'm going to read a few questions just to get our minds, focused and in the moment, right? So first, when we're thinking about our approach to change, think about if this statement resonates with you, right? First, so you expect yourself to succeed in making life changes without designating any time or mental space to accomplishing them. If that has happened in the past or currently, think about how that's now showing up in your life, right? Next, when we think about self-care, right? Because self-sabotage is going against what we actually want. So think about it. So in regards to our self-care, your approach to pleasure is a denial binge cycle. So you deny yourself of simple pleasures and relaxation, and then you stay up until 3 a.m. watching Netflix. If that is you, no judgment. Just keep that in mind. All right. Next, thinking about things that may drain your energy, but it's kind of unbeknownst to us, right? It's happening, but we don't realize it's happening. An example is you need better routines that work for you. Right? For example, you go grocery shopping every 2 days because you're always running out of the basic essential items. Just keep that in mind, right? Next, procrastination, how this may show up in your life. You create self-imposed rules that trigger and support procrastination. For example, you think if I don't have time to vacuum the house, I won't vacuum the house at all. Just an example, right? And the last one, in regards to relationships, you throw stones from a glass house. You complain about other people's behavior instead of making room for change yourself. If any of these resonate with you, you may have had self-sabotage in the past or currently dealing with it. And we're going to jump into that. So again, no judgment. We are going to talk about it after this commercial break from our sponsors, Boston Scientific.
And we are back. Before we get going, because Dr. Anderson, I feel so targeted based off of those questions. I feel like you were just talking to my soul. And you might be talking to the audience as well. And so I think we're going to have us a really good show. But just to remind you guys, we already talked about the QR code in the top right-hand corner of your screen. I also wanted to share a link. So if you look in the comment section, in case you're watching on your phone and you can't scan that code, in the comment section of wherever you're watching, whether you're in the STEM City metaverse or online, social media or YouTube, I gave the link. And so you can comment and interact with us by clicking that link or using it in your browser. And you can ask these questions anonymously. I think that's important. And I want to encourage you to share. We won't know who you are. You can share your name if you want to. I'd love to hear from you, give you a shout out. But you can share, you can ask questions anonymously, and we can just go ahead and answer. I also want to let you know, if you are watching inside the STEM City metaverse, if you're in the La Familia Health and Wellness building, there is a chat feature on the left-hand side of your screen, whichever way that is for you. And you can use that and you could chat with the audience. Now, we can't see the chat there, but you can communicate with the community that's there and really just share your thoughts and feelings. And so I really hope that you're using this interaction, because that's really what the metaverse is all about. And so I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to let Dr. Anderson really just talk to us about what is self-sabotage, because I felt attacked on that opening segment.
Well, you're not alone. You're not alone, right? Many of us have, like I said, practice consciously or unconsciously self-sabotage, right? So let's dive into it. A definition that I found from Brenner, it's raw. And I think with these type of topics, we don't want to sugarcoat things, right? We want to be honest, right? So the way self-sabotage kind of occurs in our lives is that it's a way that we destroy ourselves physically, mentally, and emotionally, or deliberately hindering our success and well-being by undermining our goals and values, right? It is universal, which just means that it impacts everyone or can impact everyone, right? No one's really kind of exempt from this kind of thing, because it's all about your internal self-talk and the things that we say to ourselves in our minds and how we feel about ourselves. And so it's also, self-sabotage is also known as behavioral deregulation, right? Where it's conscious or unconscious depending on one's level of awareness. So a lot of times folks are self-sabotaging and have no idea how, right? They just know that things aren't going their way, or they're missing deadlines, or they're not, where they want to be in life, but they're not recognizing how their behaviors are contributing to their self-sabotage, right? Are contributing to not meeting deadlines, are contributing to not getting the jobs that they want, or they're not necessarily working towards what they desire because of that negative self-talk and that idea that they're either not worthy, a lot of self-doubt, right? And we'll talk about how that starts. But that's ultimately the idea of self-sabotage and how it begins to show up in our lives.
Well, that's good, putting me on the spotlight. When you talk about self-sabotage, I want to kind of dig in a little bit more as to the awareness of it, right? Because self-sabotage is something that's not unique to individuals. I mean, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like everybody, at some way, shape, or form, participates in self-sabotage for themselves, whether they know it or not. And so, I guess where I want to dig into is, how do you identify it, right? If I don't know, let me back up. The first way to solve a problem is recognizing that you have a problem. So if you don't know that you're doing it,
Right.
how do you identify it? How do you bring it to light or even know versus, somebody who knows, they're aware of their self-destructive behavior.
Right. So an example of a conscious decision in regards to self-sabotage is being on a diet and eating 5 donuts, right? That is a conscious choice. And I live in a zone of no judgment because I'm no better than anybody else, right? So that has been me. That is me. That is a conscious, right? Because think about it, Ray, when you're picking up the donut, you're thinking, it's going to mess up my day. I should. That is conscious because it's self-destructive, right? You're going against your goal. That is very much conscious. So I just want to give examples so folks will know how to differentiate, right? Because that's easy. Unconscious, though, another an example of that would be someone that has a fear of failure. That is me, right? Someone that has a fear of failure might wait until the last minute to work on an important project because unconsciously they're avoiding the prospect of advancement. You see?
I do.
Yeah, that's what unconscious looks like, where you're going against the very thing you want, right? But the fear of failure, if I don't try, I'll never feel what it feels like to necessarily fail in that way. But ultimately, you fail anyway, right? And so that's how it works against you. So you're avoiding the advancement that you want by not trying, or waiting to the last minute, and maybe not giving your best work. Some may argue they do their best work, and that's fine. That's not necessarily the concern. It's really the unconscious belief, right? That's driving our behavior that we want to pay attention to. So I wanted to start there and just kind of give those examples. So you said, how do we begin to identify, right? And how does it begin to kind of like show up in our lives and what that looks like? First, we have to really kind of recognize what kind of self-sabotage we partake in. So there's a few common ones, right? So we have the person that tends to procrastinate, and we talked about that in a previous show, right? The person that tends to procrastinate. Then we have the person that is a perfectionist. And then we have the person that may self-medicate, and that various ways, right? And what that may look like. And we have the person, I gave an example about eating, that may do comfort eating and sabotage their health, right? Or their well-being, their physical well-being, right? And then you have some more severe one, which is like self-injury, cutting, and all those type of things. So it's important to know the common ways that folks self-sabotage, and for us to really identify the way that we are self-sabotaging. So personally, it will probably be for me around procrastination and being a perfectionist, right? So I'm constantly balancing the two, and going against that negative self-talk that definitely comes up and causes a lot of us to even start the process of self-sabotage.
Dr. Anderson, I kind of want to go Can you give examples? So you talked about these different types of self-sabotaging, the person who procrastinates, which we talked about. If you guys haven't seen it, I just want to do a shameless plug. Go back and check out some of our previous episodes because we did a whole segment a couple of weeks ago on procrastination. You talked about the perfectionist, the self-medicating, the comforter, self-injury. Can we give like maybe some examples of each, just to to kind of help people identify where they're at on, I guess, this spectrum of self-sabotage?
Just quickly, we have the perfectionist. That's the one that this person may want to complete a task flawlessly, right? But may miss incremental improvements when making little progress, right? So it's, the drive to like, it has to be perfect, but does not tap into, this is the thing about perfection. First of all, it doesn't exist, right? We just give our best work. Second of all, there's steps to perfection. The person that is so focused on perfection may miss the small steps to get them to the best that they can do, right? So that's the perfectionist. We gave the example of the self-injury one, the one that's cutting, or kind of, other physical harm to themselves. Self-medicating, that is the person that may be taking, certain medications that they don't need, right? But that is numbing their emotions, alcohol, drugs, just things that are really kind of impending or negatively affecting their advancement, right? So when you ask the question of how do we know, it's really about if our behaviors align with our long-term goals, right? If they are not, then you may be self-defeating and not even realize it. So that's a great way to like just begin to understand, do your behaviors align with your goals? Is eating this donut align with the 10 pounds that I want to lose? If it is not, you are self-defeating, right? You are self-sabotaging. And then I think I may have hit everyone. Oh, comforting food. I gave that example. Comfort, they say comfort eating. I gave that example. And so examples of what that looks like, how it shows up, and how easily it can just show up, like I said, consciously and unconsciously in our behavior.
So based off of, past shows, we made the connection with the procrastination. We also did a show on imposter syndrome. And so my question is, what's the difference between someone who may be struggling with imposter syndrome and maybe self-sabotage, or are they kind of hand in hand, go together, or symptoms of each other, if you will?
I think, yeah, they're similar. They are similar. I don't think they're the same. I think there are symptoms, and I think one may show up a bit more than the other, but they're all really aligned. This is why I love this show, right? Because it really kind of piggybacks off the next, and you recognize how our behavior is all interconnected, right? Because these are different topics, however, they very much align. So imposter syndrome is when a person kind of feels inadequate or like a fraud, right? And it affects disproportionately women, specifically Black women. People who self-sabotage often hold dysfunctional or distorted beliefs about their own abilities, which leads to them undermining their skills in their work, right? And so similar, I think with self-sabotage, the effect is more long-term. I think with procrastination, folks tend to eventually get it done. Like, right, we talked about that, how folks is like, oh, I do my best work, right? They eventually get it done. With self-sabotage, I think the long-term effects are just more harsh, if that makes sense, or maybe more immediate. I think it's more immediate in regards to self-sabotage because it directly affects what we want. Whereas procrastination, again, folks still get it done. They just stress the entire time. And they cause their body to stress long term. To self-sabotage, it's like it may not happen, or they may again, do other behaviors that go against the very things that they want.
So before I get into my favorite question, when do we seek treatment and, really start identify? We've identified self-sabotage, how do we fix it? But before we get there, I want to talk about maybe the source of self-sabotage. Is this a learned behavior? I know you had a name earlier that wasn't self-sabotage, something behavior, but is it something that that stems from maybe something we've learned growing up? Is it just something that's in us that we do naturally as humans? What's the source of self-sabotage?
Okay, so there's various sources. The thing about us as humans that are part of our survival is that we are beings of patterns. That's just how we are. We operate in patterns. And the thing is, anything can become a pattern if we focus on it long enough. So that's how our brains work. If we focus on something, it'll create a pattern. And it'll make these neuron pathways that, will be consistent. Like, this is the way we do it. So our brains can become addicted to bad things just as much as it is good things. And I think that's something to really kind of focus on, because it's not that folks want to do it. It's just that they've been doing it for such a long time. They just go to what they know. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so I'll dive into negative self-talk, but if that's the way we speak to ourselves, our go-to will always be that, and then that will be coupled with self-sabotage and all those good things, all those not so good things, right? So these are great questions, right? So how do we start? Or what is it, where does it begin? So we have to begin to create new behaviors. But first, let's just give some reasoning, right? So we first have this idea of the approach/avoidant conflict, right? So it's this kind of negative reward and positive reward. So this idea is that when we set goals, think about when you set a goal, your brain releases endorphin. It releases dopamine, the feel-good hormone, right? That says, yes, we're moving forward. This is a good thing. We're very proud of ourselves. That is the positive reward, right? So we first start with the dopamine. We feel good, right? And then we go to the avoidant dynamic, whereas whatever we're working towards is perceived, this is similar to imposter syndrome and procrastination, is perceived as a threat, right? So it could be it can feel like a physical threat or a psychological threat. And we perceive it as a negative thing, right? And so self-sabotage occurs when the desire to reduce the threat exceeds the drive to reach our goals. Remember when we talked about that and how our brains work, right? Yeah. So we'd rather feel good than feel bad. And that's why we will do that, right? So we'll go towards it, set a goal. And then the very goal that we're setting may be perceived as a threat. And we don't want that. So we'll shut it down and not attain the goal. So that's just one way. That's just one reason. Go ahead.
So let me just make sure I'm clarifying. So set a goal, good. But the steps to get to that goal, discomfort, don't want to do it. And so that outweighs in our mind the goal, even if the goal is ultimately for the greater good.
Yeah. And
so we self-sabotage our way instead of getting there. So I guess our goal is to try to make sure that we prioritize the end game and make sure that end game is stronger than the steps that of inconvenience that it takes to get there. For example, I play football and game day. We always love game day, but nobody likes practice getting there. And so, but you want to get to the game day. So you go through the practice to get there, but nobody likes it, but you can't really skip practice. And so that's how my brain is interpreting it. To get here, we have to go through here, but here sucks.
Yes, it doesn't feel good, right? Because there's not an instant reward in practice. The game is a reward, not the practice. Yeah. Right. And so
practice. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So that's what's happening all the time, right? In our brains under that, I think, concept, right? Because there's various concepts as why. But I can attest to that concept. very much. The research can attest to that concept. But that's not everyone's reason. But yes, that's what it looks like when we have that approach versus kind of avoidant conflict that happens, right? And then next we have modeling. So that's just all about what you saw growing up. Yeah. I always tell folks, you weren't born on an island. So your community, your family, your church, everyone around you has poured into you good things and not so good things, but everyone has an influence, right? And so it's not just who you are. That's a big part, but it's not just who you are, it's also where you come from, right? So modeling is a big thing. It's about what you saw. So if you witnessed a parent in childhood that lacked confidence to succeed, or the parent was constantly potentially, but the parent was kind of constantly warning the child, right? Don't do this. This is scary. Don't go on the playground. You'll fall. Don't touch this. You'll burn yourself. Don't do this. Where the child internalizes the world as unsafe, and they're afraid to explore, right? So they avoid it. So that's another way that folks can begin to self-sabotage. And again, not even know where it begins. So modeling is a big one. And so this is for all of us to just be aware of. There's no judgment. Parents are doing the best that they can. They don't know, right? But us as adults are now responsible to kind of figure out where it's stemming from. Next, we have rejection and neglect. So if you were rejected or neglected by a parent, it can cause someone to naturally have low self-esteem and have negative self-image issues, right? So this person can simply just self-sabotage personal relationships in an effort to avoid vulnerability and rejection, right? Because the fear is, I never want to experience that feeling again. Yeah. And being in close relationships with anyone poses a threat, because now I'm in position to potentially feel that emotion and to have that experience again. So I just avoid it. Yeah. And they sabotage relationships. We see it a lot. I work with a lot of folks that do that. But again, it's not always conscious. Sometimes it is unconscious. But we are in positions to help and support and bring that to the forefront. I have a few more, Ray, that I just want to get through.
Go ahead.
Next, we have adaptive and maladaptive behaviors. So it's just ways that we adopt certain behaviors. So when we think about how we were raised, certain behaviors were necessary for our survival, right? The world may deem it not good. We shouldn't operate in this way. But for many people, it was about their survival. The thing about that is that when we get out of these environments, we are still utilizing that same behavior. And we no longer need to. We don't know how to shut it off. So adaptive versus maladaptive behavior. Right? Adaptive behavior is all about what you need to survive. Then it becomes maladaptive when you no longer need to utilize that behavior to survive. Now you're just pushing people away because people weren't safe in your childhood. But now folks want to get to know you, but you don't know how to be in relationship with folks, right? It is now maladaptive. Another way we self-sabotage. Next, we talk about trauma. If this individual has been violated by anyone, their trust has been, violated and has interrupted their lives. It may feel like the world is unsafe, and they view themselves as undeserving of good things in life, right? Leading to self-sabotage. And so again, we see that often. And I want to add another one that is not, it doesn't feel as severe, right? But it still shows up as self-sabotage, as someone just simply being in their comfort zone, right? It keeps them small. It keeps them in a box. It keeps them stuck, right? It keeps them feeling as if they're not worthy of expanding their horizon, right? So it's just simply wanting to be in your comfort zone is self-sabotage.
Dr. Anderson, that was great. And obviously, if you're like me, you've identified a couple of those. It's not just one specific source, right?
Yes,
So you
yes,
might be able to. It might just be a culmination of a few things.
yeah.
Um, and so, Dr. Anderson, I want to take a quick break and hear a message from Boston Scientific. But when we come back, I want you to really just dive into my favorite question, right? You know, when do I get to come see Dr. Anderson? Or when is it time to seek professional help? And what do those treatment options look like? We've identified it, so now let's figure out how we overcome. Before we go to this break, if you guys want to share any of your stories, drop it in the comments. Use the QR code right above Dr. Anderson's head. Take your phone, open the camera, and scan it. Leave us a question. I've also dropped a link inside the comments. So if you're on your phone, just go to the comment section and you can participate that way. If you're on social media, drop a line in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to throw out a shout out. And so we'll be right back. I hope you stick with us. We'll come back with some treatment options.
We know how to treat the colds and the coughs. We know how to treat the bumps and the bruises, the cuts and fractures. But how do we treat, I can't afford a day off work to see a doctor? How do we treat, I've never had a doctor who speaks my language? How do we treat, I don't know how to connect with some of my patients? How do we treat, you're not listening? We can't treat what we cannot see. So we have to look closer and see what we're missing. People, patients, misdiagnosed, misunderstood, overlooked. These are the people left out of a system charged with helping them. And it's up to us to find them in our communities, in our relationships, in our data. We're meeting them where they are, discovering who they are. We're taking an honest look to understand their healthcare needs and delivering effective ways to reach them. We don't have all the answers, but together we can find the way to address the gaps in our healthcare system, to provide something better, to find more chances to save more lives. It won't be easy, but we can help make it right, because no one should be missed.
Welcome back to Healthy Doses. We hope you guys are really enjoying today's topic on self-sabotage. Thank you to our partners, Boston Scientific, for that wonderful message and for giving us the opportunity to continue to bring you these tools and resources to really help you be the best you possible. So before we went to that break, Dr. Anderson, we've talked about self-sabotage. We identified it. We talked about the symptoms. We talked about the source. Why do we self-sabotage? So you always hear you can't address a problem till you know you have it. So we know we got it now. How do we start taking the steps? You know, first off, when is it time to move past, you know, this is not normal day-to-day, you know, stuff. This is now a problem and I need to address it. When do we know we've hit that point? When do we come to see you? And then ultimately, how do we start taking steps to overcome and get out of our own way?
Good question. So in regards to like treatments, right, and what that looks like, the thing about self-sabotage is even if it is unconscious, folks know when they're not meeting their goals, right? They know when their behavior is not necessarily aligned with what they want to accomplish. So a lot of that, like how do you know, looks like folks being frustrated with their current lives and how spirit speaks. So their current lives, but also their relationships. So when folks are coming seeking support, it looks like I've been in 3 failed relationships. Something doesn't feel right, and I'm being blamed for it, or I'm shutting down, or I'm disconnected. It looks like I have very little friends, or that my friends don't feel close to me, or that they tend to pour out their hearts to me, but I never feel safe enough to pour out my heart to them. So folks are aware that what they're wanting is not happening. And oftentimes that's when they begin to seek treatment. And the ones that are conscious enough and aware enough, they know that although I want this, I am not doing the very things to get to where I want. And so therefore I need support. So that treatment really looks like a lot of behavioral therapies that one would use to aid in interrupting um, ingrained patterns and thoughts and actions of that individual, while strengthening their um, self-regulation, right? Like, so they know how to pour back into themselves, right? So when negative self-talk comes up, they know how to, and it's literally just called positive self-talk, right? They know how to extend themselves grace. They know how to begin to regulate their emotions in the moment and not allow their fear of failure, because that's a big one for folks, to become their reality. So there's a lot of motivational therapies that can help reconnect these individuals to their goals and values, right? So a big one is cognitive behavioral therapy. We call it CBT, where it uses techniques to relieve one's like cognitive distortions.
Hmm.
When you hear someone say kind of they have a distorted lens, just means that their reality is not the reality for others, right? That their experience may have tainted their worldview, right? And so with therapy, we give them other ways of seeing things outside of their distortions. Yeah. And we want to improve those patterns and their overall kind of well-being. We have another one called Dialectical Behavioral Therapy, DBT, which works on problems that involve kind of intense emotions. And that's a big one with self-sabotage. You do feel intense emotions in the moment. And the hope is that this helps with impulsive behaviors, right? Helps with any kind of impulse control issues, and helps this person get along with other people, to help them regulate their emotions in a better way, instead of, again, through their distorted lens, taking it out of folks, and destroying relationship after relationship.
So that's cool. So I want to dig into it. So we talked about behavioral therapy. What you call it? The the cognitive behavioral therapy. I should know this too, Dr. Anderson. You know, I am a psychology degree.
Mhm.
Some of these things have kind of gone out, but cognitive behavioral therapy. Can we just talk about some of the things? You know, what does that look like? You know, what are some actual tips that like people can do? I know you talked about positive self-talk, or as I'm interpreting it, positive affirmations, if you will, to kind of try to push out the negative thoughts and negative self-talk. But what are some other ways that people can actively try to get out of their own way and their pathway to success?
Yeah. So how to stop, right, is what you're
Yes.
asking.
Yes. My
How
roundabout way.
Yeah, how to start working on it.
Yes.
And so there's a few ways, right? One that I said earlier is really kind of identifying which kind of self-sabotager you are, right? We talked about the various ones and what that can look like. So it's good to know which one, and then you can kind of begin to focus on how that specific one is showing up. Think about what you're doing before you do it. So these are the folks that are extremely conscious, or aware of some sort of how it is kind of showing up in their lives, right? So we want you to pause and think about what you're doing before you do it. So if we know that donut is not going to help, how about we not? eat it? How about we put it aside? How about we give it to someone else, right? We really want to be intentional and aware about what we're doing, because self-sabotage is also surrounding kind of impulsive choices and decisions, and also about patterns and what we just kind of naturally do, right? Next, Ray was talking about this kind of positive self-talk, right? We want to use positive words to design our lives, right? So instead of saying, I never do this, right? I never go on walks. I never look good in this dress. I'll never have a partner. I'll never find love, right? We want to use our language in a positive way, right? So if walks are a thing, we want to say, okay, so today I'll do 5 minutes of walking, Today I'll reach out to that person. Today I'll share something with a friend that I haven't shared with them today, right? And so we want to kind of live in the state of action, and focus on what we can do instead of what we believe we can't do. And that kind of pushes us towards something instead of what we don't believe we have or will ever have, right? You want to keep positive people around you. You want to keep good company at all times, because who you surround yourself with is also who you're influenced by, right? So keep good company. You want folks that don't allow you to get lost in your own story, right? Don't allow you to just kind of soak around and talk about what you're not doing or what you can't do, right? You want folks that help you to get out your own way, that instead of focusing on what you don't have, they help you focus on your goals and what you want, right? Not the folks that are like, yeah, me too, this sucks. You want folks that are like, okay, if you haven't walked in a month, how do we start? How can I encourage you and support you in this moment? Okay. Next, we want to increase our self-awareness. We want to create more time for deep breathing or meditations. We want to ask our bodies how we feel in this moment and what we need, right? Because self-sabotage is also kind of a disconnect from our core values. And so we want to recognize, what do we need in this moment? What do our physical bodies need, but also emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually, what do we need? And do those very things. Then we want to change our behaviors. We talked about how easily it is to get wrapped in our behaviors as people, because that is how we function, right? So we want to ask ourselves, is this behavior leading to, the best outcome, or is it leading to my destruction, right? And then make this decision accordingly. But old patterns are just those voices telling us to kind of do it again and again and again, and we don't want to do that. And lastly, we want to set those real goals. We talked about that earlier, attainable goals, and we want to make sure the steps are just as important as the outcome.
Dr. You just gave us a lot. I want to do a quick recap just to make sure everybody got it. So ways that you can stop and kind of get out of your own way, things to kind of help you limit the self-sabotage that we create in our own lives. And so you opened up, you said, first think about it. Is this helping me get to the goal? Is this helping me get to the end game? Did I pick that donut up? I know I'm singing to it. I'm dancing around the house before I bite it. I know it's bad. That's why I'm doing all this extra stuff. Right. But think about the goal. Is it going to help? Can I back out? Yeah. You also talked about use positive, get rid of that negative self-talk. Use that positive affirmation, use that positive talk to really help you kind of realign and know that you can do this and get rid of that doubt and that negativity that's infiltrating your mind. Keep good company around you. Make sure you have the support and people who really want to help you succeed, because we can't do this on our own. And so a lot of the times we do need to have that positive reinforcement from others. And if you have destructive people around you, you will continue to do destructive behavior. At least that's how my mind is interpreting it. You also talked about meditation, deep breaths, taking a couple seconds to kind of just recalibrate before you partake, before you enter that destruction, before you come home And what does Kevin Hart say? Yell about the microwave being on. There's no reason for this fight. You just wanted to pick something. So take that deep breath before you go and engage in this destructive behavior. I know one thing I like to do when I sense is I just take a walk. I just go. I gotta get fresh air. I gotta walk away and let's rethink about this. Ask the question. Or excuse me, I think you said changing behavior patterns.
Yeah.
And so, really just kind of stop doing what you've been doing. Like you recognize what is it? Insanity. It's doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you just got to do something different, whether you've done it before or it's just something completely new. That's something I like to do myself. Is if I haven't done it, I usually run towards it because I want to see what it's like. And so it changes up my thought pattern. It gives you a lot more experiences and gives you a lot more tools to kind of really deal with whatever it is that's going on. And then setting goals. And that's pretty much self-explanatory. Set those goals and continue to reassess and set new goals if you have to, whatever it takes to get there. How does that sound, Doc?
It sounds great. It really sounds great. And again, the thing, one thing that stood out about patterns and insanity, and the example is that I think for me what made it more helpful is understanding how the brain works and why logically it can make sense to us, right? To stop doing certain things. But we have to be intentional about creating new patterns because it doesn't just stop. That's not how it works because our brains are programmed to have certain neural pathways to keep us going, to keep us surviving, right? Mm-hmm. And so we have to do things differently. It's not just going to happen because you wanted to. So these examples, we have to intentionally start implementing those in our lives. I think it's really good to identify first. Ray says, you don't know you have a problem, so you identify you have a problem, right? And so really identify and journal out where you think your self-sabotage started, how it's continuing in your life, where it's showing up in your relationships and, and all that good stuff.
Well, Dr. Anderson, I know we're drawing closer to the end, but I do have some questions coming in. This is one of my favorite parts where we get to really kind of talk with the audience and really kind of hear their questions and they can participate with us. And so I do have a couple questions coming in from just different sources, whether you guys are using the link, whether you're using the QR code. If you have questions, scan, ask. If you're in the comment section, social media, YouTube, STEM City, drop them in the comment section and we'll see if we can get to them. But the first question is, this came in, are there specific groups or demographics that self-sabotage more than others? And what I think they're going with this, are there, a specific racial group or minority, maybe social economic status or gender? Do men or women self-sabotage more than others? I bet you there's a lot of people who might be pointing fingers at each other. But is there any science or research that supports one demographic or group of people self-sabotage another, or is this just a human? Is this just a human symptom?
Yeah. So with self-sabotage, no one's exempt. I think, and we kind of gone through the various reasons why, and I'm sure there's a lot more, right, of why folks may self-sabotage. What we see is that depending on, how you've grown up, your own self-talk, what that looks like, it can be anyone, it can be everyone that self-sabotages, to be honest. I think it's obvious that certain marginalized communities would have it more often because they hear more negative expressions about themselves, right? Often, consistently, right? And so the thing about self-sabotage, one of the biggest things that they talk about is negative self-talk. So if you're consistently hearing things negative about yourself or your community or people that look like you, it's a lot easier in marginalized communities, African American communities, right? To think less than or believe that you're less than, which can ultimately turn into self-sabotage. Or if you're coming from impoverished groups, right? And we talked about what that looked like for certain communities that may lack, certain resources, that they may feel less than and not have the proper resources that they need, which would lead to low self-esteem, a lack of, kind of identity and what that looks like, a lack of self-love and all those things. So that can ultimately turn into self-sabotage as well.
I got a juicy one for you, Dr. Anderson.
Mm-hmm.
Question is, in my younger years, it seemed like I was always picking bad partners in romantic relationships.
Okay.
Was that a form of self-sabotage, or is that a form of self-sabotage?
I don't know why I'm triggered in this moment.
Your turn.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It is. I'm blessed to not be doing that anymore. But yes. And a lot of us have. Again, no judgment. A lot of us have. The way it shows up, though, right? We talked about how it may show up in relationships and all that. But the thing about romantic relationships is it can show up in various forms around choosing partners that are incompatible, picking fights, refusing to fully commit to relationships, right? Having unrealistic expectations, chronic mistrust in others, silencing yourself and suffering in silence, which we see a lot, and losing yourself in relationships. That is a big one. Or taking the identity of your partner as your own. So yes, that is definitely a form of self-sabotage, and I think really important for us to identify now before we get into long-term relationships with folks that may not be aligned, right? What we want or need in that moment. Other ways that it may show up in relationships is ignoring negative emotions, acting as if they don't exist, criticizing your partner. That's often a sign that it may not be them, it may be you, and the fact that you've chosen someone that you are not emotionally connected with, or you're not in a place to emotionally connect with that one. Holding grudges and directing energy at things that kind of misdirecting your energy, where you're upset with your relationship, but you take it out on your mother. You take it out on your child, right? When in fact, you're really upset with your current romantic relationship.
Dr. Anderson, I got a couple more questions that I want to get to quickly before we go to the end of the show. But we have a question that said, how do you continue to be a good friend or supporter to a self-sabotaging friend that rejects your positive encouragement?
That's an excellent question. So we talked about what that kind of looks like with friendships, right? And keeping good company and encouraging that person or not allowing them to kind of stay in that negative space or that negative story and narrative that they may have. But that's only if the person's willing to take your advice. If they're not willing to, there's nothing you can do. But you can let them know that as a friend and a confidant that you'll be there when they're able to kind of step outside their own way. And again, we want to provide a non-judgmental space. We want to provide them for you to be an ear. But again, you are also an important entity in that relationship. And if it is draining you or you feel pushed aside, they may not be in a position to hear you in that moment. Again, examples of self-sabotage, right? How it shows up in relationships. So if they're not in a space, I wouldn't take it upon myself or yourself to kind of be pushed aside or be ignored. It may just be that you step aside and just be there if you feel comfortable when they are ready to hear you. ready to communicate outside of their negative space, because they may not just be in a space to hear you right now.
Got it. Dr. Anderson, I got one more question for you. And the question is, how do you balance identifying with multiple types of self-sabotage? So we talked about the procrastinator, the perfectionist, or comfort eater. Should we focus on improving one at a time, or is there a way that we could just kind of tackle this all at once?
You guys have great questions. So in therapy, it's a process. I'll be honest with you. It is a process. The hope is that in many ways, the way it shows up is still interconnected, right? And so we want to get to the core belief system. We want to get to the root cause. If we can begin to get to the root cause, we may kind of tackle things a little bit quicker. But it's not an overnight kind of fix. It depends on the person and how kind of deep each one is, right? So one may be, if it's the binge eating or the comforting, if that has immediate health issues, right? We want to tackle that first. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If they're all kind of on the same range, like, okay, we can kind of pick and choose, and maybe one is kind of more interconnected. Maybe the perfectionist is more interconnected with the other. It just depends on the person. But I would just say be open to the process and don't expect an easy fix. But if we're able to get to that deep root cause, we can start tackling a lot, at a time. But it varies from person to person.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson, and really big thank you to everyone who's watching. We're approaching the end of the show. I want to make sure everybody gets back to their Saturday, but we thank you, and we thank you for participating with us. Thank you for those questions you submitted. This show can be whatever you want it to be, and so we continue each week to encourage you to talk with us, to drop your comments, to share your experiences. Using the links, the QR code, the comment section. We can see you. We thank you. We want to give you shout outs. So even if you just want to drop in, where you're watching from, we want to hear from you. And so, Dr. Anderson, what are some closing remarks, some final notes you want to leave everybody with before we shut down for today?
Okay. So again, I love this topic. Self-sabotage is a big one. For me personally, for a lot of us, and recognizing that as we really kind of tackle what we want in life, right, and how we want to move forward, I want us to take inventory of how our behaviors are influencing our outcome. If those behaviors are not aligning with our long-term goals, I want us to take a moment and to begin to kind of tap into why. How is it showing up and why, right? We gave you all a lot of information, and I know it can be overwhelming, right? But you are your own expert in your life. And so as you begin to understand more about yourself and become more aware, I want you to identify what is stopping you from becoming the best version of yourself. If you need additional support, again, I talked about therapy for Black girls, which anyone can join. Psychology Today is another good one to find additional support and therapists. But if you're simply aware enough to journal it out, to follow the steps that we talked about, I'm really encouraging you to get to simply the root cause of what's causing you to interrupt your own long-term goals. Right? And so lastly, I want to say thank you for, of course, being here. And next week on Saturday, we will be covering self-actualization. You all have a great day.
For more than 40 years, Boston Scientific has relied on our spirit of relentless innovation to advance science for life. We have the privilege and responsibility to deliver higher quality, less invasive, and more accessible device solutions, and the need has never been greater. Boston Scientific technologies are used to treat roughly 30 million patients around the world each year. Across our business, our products are supported by vast clinical data, including bench testing, randomized control trials, and ongoing real-world evidence to ensure the highest quality products make it into the hands of our customers. And we're always looking for ways to provide even more effective therapies and solutions. We invest over $1 billion annually in research and development to sustain a robust pipeline of meaningful innovations. We continuously strengthen our manufacturing and operations capabilities with artificial intelligence and advanced microelectronics to create devices that are smaller and smarter. And we're collaborating with our medical partners and physicians to advance digital capabilities with remote device support and a broad scope of training and education programs. Advancing Science for Life is also about supporting our employees and the communities in which we operate. Now more than ever, we rely on our values to guide our company as a global business and as a global corporate citizen. We're working to help confront healthcare inequities and social injustice, not only with financial contributions, but through volunteer service, advocacy, and expanding market accessibility. We're also focused on environmental initiatives that move us towards our goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2030. The unmet needs are great, but the future of healthcare is bright. Our innovation centers provide a place to explore opportunities, examine solutions, and see what lies ahead for medicine. Together, we can continue the relentless pursuit of innovation to help everyone live longer, healthier lives and make a difference all over the world.